there were many reasons Travancore thought it would survive as an independent nation, and also clearly the cabinet mission plan which came in earlier and the Mountbatten plan, it was made very clear that the states had that choice. You could be independent, and there were many, as many of these states argued, there were many countries in Europe which were smaller than these princely states, and they were independent countries. So why could these small countries not exist in the Indian subcontinent? So it had a fair case to make.
We're going to move straight away into, as I said, the, flow back in time to 1947, when it was an equally, if not even more daunting, messy situation where the partition had already happened. There were killings, there were riots, India was about to be born, and yet there were 565 recalcitrant pieces in the jigsaw that had to be stitched together in an absolutely jaw-dropping 50 days. Now that's a story that is pretty untold even in our popular consciousness. We know that Sardar Patel is called the Iron Man of India because he pulled this together. But personally speaking for myself, I've never actually really focused on what it took, what level of leadership, what machinations, what mowing down of resistance did it take to create and stitch together an India that could actually come together as a nation on 1947 at the stroke of midnight. That's the thriller story that we are going to hear next on stage by Mallika Ravikumar, who's written 565. She's an author and historian, and we're delighted to have her here joining us today with this absolutely compelling story about the birth of India. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming her. Kalpesh, I don't see a mic here. If you can just quickly bring one. Thank you. Mallika, it's such a pleasure to have you. It's really perspective giving that, life is never simple and it's never peaceful. As I said, when you listen to this whole kaleidoscope that's going on in 2025, in a way, it's a mirror of what was going on in 1947, and you really had to have visionary leaders. Okay, sir, thank you. We needed visionary leaders to pull that together. So let's dive right into that story. Out of 565, you've picked 13 stories to tell. Will you just give us a quick bird's eye view on why you picked those 13 stories? What's the kind of big picture on that?
Sure. Before I begin, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. It's an honor, in fact, given the lineup of illustrious speakers you've had on this platform. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. So 13 out of the 565, of course, the reason we picked these 13 is firstly, not all 565 states had controversies. Many of them were very, very small. There was a joke going that some states were so small that the people living there, the front door opened into one state and the back door opened into the other. So they were that small. They weren't even, being plotted on a map. So obviously, those states had no choice. When Britain withdrew, just to give a background, when Britain withdrew from India in 1947, the princely states, there were about 600 of them across India and formed 45% of the subcontinent, pre-partition subcontinent. So it's a large part of the subcontinent, and somehow all the history we learn about, Quit India movement and so on, is only the other half, which was British India. The 565 states formed princely India, and we somehow don't talk about it for some reason. And many of these states were actually very small, and they were given a choice of either joining India, joining Pakistan, or remaining free. And many of them were very small and had no choice, so there was no question of including them. Many of them, the choice was very obvious because they were Muslim majority states on the what would be Pakistani side, and they would join Pakistan, and the others were very clearly going to join India. But the contentious ones where the drama took place, and naturally it was impossible to cover all states. So we narrowed down on those states where there was drama and big states. So for example, if Hyderabad had remained independent, we would have had a gaping hole in the middle of India, in the Deccan, not connecting north with south. Or if Bhopal or Bhopal had joined Pakistan, there was a chance of that happening, we would have had a pocket of Pakistan inside India. So these were the dramatic stories that needed to be told, and that's why we picked this collection of 13.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's look at a few of those, and then I want want to look at the dramatis personae, Nehru, Sardar Patel, Mountbatten. I was surprised to see what a huge role he played in stitching India together.
Yes.
And then, of course, there was all the Menon, of course. But then on the other side, there were other British officers that were actually trying to tear India apart.
Yes.
So we'll come to that. But I wanted to start with two states that really, Hyderabad and Kashmir's story one knows really well. We'll come to them. But Travancore really detested the Congress and they wanted to break apart. Why is that and what was the story there?
So the ball is set rolling actually by Travancore, which is the first chapter in the book. Travancore is the first state to declare independence. And Travancore is, the southern part of Kerala, which had a very good economy. It was industrialized. It was very liberal. It had a temple entry law, which allowed Dalits into temples far before that was allowed in British India. So it had a forward-looking, very young Maharaja. But the Diwan of Travancore was C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, who had earlier been a nationalist, but he had fallen out with the Congress, and he detested the Congress leadership, Gandhi, Nehru, and Patel, and he really wanted nothing to do with them. And he was very clear that Travancore would become a second-grade state if it joined India, whereas if it remained independent, it also had a long coastline. It had large deposits of monazite, which was an ingredient which would go into the making of thorium, which was actually in big demand as something that would go into nuclear energy. And Britain wanted that. So there were many reasons Travancore thought it would survive as an independent nation, and also clearly the cabinet mission plan, which came in earlier, and the Mountbatten plan, it was made very clear that the states had that choice. You could be independent, and there were many, as many of these states argued, there were many countries in Europe which were smaller than these princely states, and they were independent countries. So why could these small countries not exist in the Indian subcontinent? So it had a fair case to make. And C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer did not see eye to eye with the Congress leadership, and that was one. And many historians actually think he is the one to blame for what happened in Travancore. But even the Maharaja's mother, Travancore had this system where it was a matrilineal system. So the Maharaja's mother also, it was a joint decision. I wouldn't blame C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer alone. But together they did decide that Travancore had a good chance of staying afloat as an independent nation, and that is what set the ball. They were the first state in early June 1947 to declare that from 15th August 1947, Travancore would become an independent nation. Yeah. So that's how it all begins.
I think just to drive home the sheer significance of what Mallika is telling us is to the 13 states she's picked, from Hyderabad, Kashmir, Bhopal, Indore, Gwalior, Junagadh, Tripura, Rampur. Imagine India, which would have all these as independent nations inside, Yeah. That would be how balkanized we would be.
Absolutely.
And Nehru really expresses a kind of terror of this,
yes.
So do share with the audience Nehru's take on this and then Sardar Patel's take on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, there was a meeting of 13th June 1940. So the decision, the Mountbatten plan, or what can also be called the Menon plan to divide India into India and Pakistan, is taken on the 2nd and the 3rd of June 1947. On 13th, that is 10 days after that, there is another meeting where Nehru explodes because he realizes that Travancore wants to stay independent. Hyderabad, the Nizam of Hyderabad also issues a farman that Hyderabad will stay independent. And Nehru he's livid at that meeting. And he's accusing Conrad Caulfield, who is a political advisor to the Viceroy, of misfeasance, and he says, you are breaking India apart, there won't be an India left. And that is the one thing which I think a lot of people misunderstand is, even particularly now with the controversy of Congress accepted partition and so on, that the alternative to a unified, the alternative to Pakistan and division and partition was not a unified India. It was the India of the cabinet mission plan, which would have been a fractured and a disunited India, and an India fractured into several pieces. And that is what was avoided. So the cards on the table were not an Akhand Bharat, that is a unified India versus partition and divided India, but the cards on the table were a divided India and an absolutely fractured, splintered India. And that is what was avoided by accepting partition. So that's a key thing to remember, because as you said, Nehru was aghast that India could have split up into so many parts, and he was the person who actually, so Ian Copeland is a historian who studied this extensively, and he says that Nehru is the person who actually urged Mountbatten to set up a states department, a separate ministry, in order to just pay full attention to the issue of the states, because all their attention was, like I said, to the other 50%, that is British India, and they didn't realize that the states would become such an explosive thing. Because how it all began is in 1857, after the British monarch took over from the East India Company, Britain stopped its policy of annexation, We learned that in school, doctrine of lapse, doctrine of
Dalhousie
annexation,
and-
Dalhousie. Yes, and that's how they've expanded their, the British India, the provinces and so on. But after 1857, the first war of independence, they stopped that policy and entered into treaties with the remaining Maharajas and Nawabs whom they hadn't annexed and who actually supported them during 1857. So these treaties, under these treaties, these Maharajas and Nawabs had to do a number of things, not have fortifications, not have large armies. Several conditions were laid down. In exchange, Britain would protect them. So this was a treaty relation which they had. So when Britain had decided to withdraw in 1947, they had to break these treaties, but they had agreed in those treaties that they would be perpetual. And these Maharajas felt very let down because they didn't think this British rule would end at all. Yeah. And now they were all wondering what to do because they had actually taken positions against the Congress. And now they would have to be, at their mercy. So it was a very difficult situation for them as well. But yes, that's the background. And Nehru was the one who actually urged Mountbatten to set up the States Department. And Sardar Patel was, of course, at the helm of the States Department. He was the Minister of States. And V.P. Menon was his deputy, who was actually wanting to retire, but Sardar Patel asked him to join him. And he, of course, was one of all the plans, the accession of these princely states to India, the partition plan, all of them were from Menon's hands. So he was a very interesting and important person. But yes, these three people and Mountbatten surprisingly batted for India in this game. And that's how they stitched together the various states and brought it together.
Yeah. So before we go back into some of the attempted assassinations, murders, all of that,
yes.
I do want to both focus on all these three people. You said about Nehru, he was, of course, very hostile to the princely states. He called them
shopkeeper mentality, he said
shopkeeper
they had.
mentality,
yes.
knaves, fools,
yes.
Feudals,
yes,
all
absolutely.
of that. He had absolutely no time for them.
Absolutely.
But it was V.P. Menon who really suggested that they bring Mountbatten into
right.
pulling the princely states together. And in your book, it's really Mountbatten who ends up being pivotal in many of the accessions.
Right. Yes.
So he was the Viceroy of India and supposed to be a neutral player.
Absolutely.
Why did he do that? Was it his personal relationship with Nehru, or why were the princes even listening to him?
So there are two theories. One is, Mountbatten, when he was leaving, when the British rule was coming to an end, he was hoping to be the Governor General of both India and Pakistan. Just to pause, the map that is being shown here, the pink portion is, princely India. So it's a large part. Just wanted to show that. So Mountbatten was hoping to be the Governor General of both India and Pakistan. Nehru agreed, and Mountbatten was, in fact, the Governor General for about a year after we became independent, till 1948, till C. Rajagopalachari took over. But Jinnah refused. He said, I don't want a British person to be a Governor General, and how is it going to work if our Governor General is going to sit in Delhi? We are not going to have Pakistan's Governor General sitting in India. So he absolutely refused, and this was taken as a personal affront by Mountbatten, and that could have swung in India's favor, because he then helped India to get these states to accede to India. The other factor was that Mountbatten had, he was the great-grandson of Queen Victoria, and here he was dismantling her empire. So and he was by a lot of accounts, a very vainglorious figure who was very conscious of how is history going to remember me. And this is one thing he thought, if he left a united, consolidated India from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, that is a legacy that would go against his name. Historians would credit him with that. So these are the two factors that did help, help Mountbatten to sort of bat in the Indian team, and that worked well for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, please do buy the book. It's outside, and Mallika will also be signing it. But it's really amazing, because Mountbatten is literally in the war room many times, squeezing many body parts of theirs to make them really join India, which was fascinating to see.
Yeah.
And of course, you've written that also the fact that he's royalty
yes.
had some cachet with the princes, they
Correct.
respected that and
Correct. Yeah.
were able to treat it as a boys' club zone, and could accept
Yes.
that. Again, to share with the audience that the sheer strain of this, it's a detail that I didn't know, that Sardar Patel had a heart attack in the middle of Hyderabad's accession to India when there was the military intervention.
Right.
And that really shows the kind of strain that there was to pull all of this together at the same time.
Right.
The Hyderabad story is kind of known, but do tell us a little about it. And why was Sardar Patel particularly so sort of tense during that time?
Right. So Hyderabad was the largest state in India, and when we say Hyderabad, we don't mean the city of Hyderabad today. It's a large area. The Nizam was ruling that, and the Nizam of Hyderabad was said by many accounts to be the richest man in the world at that time, and he was a very eccentric figure. He was the richest man. You know, he would have, for example, in his room the Jacob diamond, which is one of either the fifth largest diamond in the world or something, as a paperweight. But he would be walking around in old flip-flops. His clothes were almost tattered. His room was shabby, and outside his window, he'd have truckloads filled with gold bars. So he was a very eccentric figure, and odd also. He'd have secret cameras put up in his guests' bedrooms. Oh. Yeah, and he's actually filmed his European guests in their bedrooms, and a very, very strange figure. So Hyderabad was, like I said, the largest state and also the most populous. Even at that time, it had a population of about 16 million, so very, very large state. And Hyderabad, contrary to some other situations, this was a Hindu majority state, but a Muslim ruler. And the Nizam of Hyderabad was the only ruler who was given the status of being called the Exalted Highness, because in the First World War, he had supported Britain to such an extent, even taking a position against the Ottoman Empire, despite being a Muslim ruler. And the British therefore conferred this title of His Exalted Highness. So he was the most special of all these rulers. And Hyderabad, because he had this position, he thought he could bargain and get away. He held out for the longest time. Hyderabad, in fact, acceded to India only after a military operation in September 1948. So from August 1947 to September 1948, Hyderabad was not a part of India. And why Sardar Patel actually, he left Hyderabad to Lord Mountbatten to deal with, because he said, Nizam is special. And the British always were playing a double game. Like in Travancore, they wanted the monazite deposits, and therefore they didn't want to discourage or didn't want to take a position which was antagonistic and hurt the Maharaja. Similarly, in the Nizam's case, they thought the Nizam being so wealthy and would, after the World War, the British condition wasn't good, and they would benefit from the Nizam being so wealthy as an ally. So the British weren't willing to antagonize him. And so Lord Mountbatten said, leave Hyderabad to me. And Sardar Patel therefore took a backseat in case of Hyderabad, and the others he didn't. And it just went on deteriorating the situation. The Nizam of Hyderabad actually also had a very good advisor in Sir Mirza Ismail, who was his diwan and who was against the two-nation theory of Jinnah. He was against the Muslim League ideology. But he actually stepped down because the Nizam did not agree with him. And Jinnah becomes the Nizam's advisor, and Jinnah is feeding him all kinds of information, saying, we will help you, if you fall into trouble, you don't have to worry, you can hold out, and so on. And the Hyderabad situation just keeps deteriorating. And there's another very interesting factor. You have the MIM, which is led by a person called Qasim Razvi, and the Razakars, which is a military wing that he had. And the situation therefore becomes also very violent, and there's a lot of clashes between Hindus and Muslims there. The communist uprising also takes place in Telangana, so a lot of Hindus begin to flee the state. So many things put into the situation of Hyderabad, and finally, the Nizam keeps agreeing to some terms, and then he withdraws. And that happens multiple times until about August 1948, when Hyderabad actually refers the matter to the Security Council in the UN. And we all know how Kashmir went. Right. So we did not want another situation like that. And that was the final trigger for the military operation. And then the Indian army goes into Hyderabad. And the Nizam had, Qasim Razvi had made bold statements like he will have the Nizam's flag flying in the Red Fort and so on. But Hyderabad ultimately fell in 5 days. And within 5 days, India had control of Hyderabad. So it's a very interesting story.
Yeah. Again, there's just a little detail, but in the book, there's a dialogue where Sardar Patel, when he orders Operation Polo, which is the military intervention, he tells Nehru to go to sleep,
Yes.
Is that something which is fictive?
No. So this is a work of non-fiction. So everything here is, nothing from my imagination. But there are certain creative liberties. For instance, if Nehru and Patel are writing letters to each other, I would have turned it into a face-to-face conversation to make it dramatic. Right. But what they say to each other is completely based on the letters. And those creative liberties have been disclosed at the end of every chapter. Yeah. But in this case, yes, just before Operation Polo is to be launched, we get the news that Jinnah has passed away in Pakistan. And Nehru says, the head of Pakistan, the head of the state has passed away. Is this the right time to launch a military operation? And Sardar Patel says, just go to sleep. This is actually recorded in conversation. He says, don't bother about it. We are just going to march in and take Hyderabad. So that actually happened, yes.
Right. you know, there are just so many fascinating stories, but I want to come briefly to Jinnah and now his team of, you know, I'm calling it machinators. They were, of course, doing it for their own country.
Right, right.
But there was Conrad Cornfield.
Yes.
And there was Jinnah himself, who was really making, like, there's the blank check incident that he gives, you know. So do share with the audience what the Pakistan team was doing to pull over the princely states. And that really, again, accentuates what a miracle it is that the princely states actually stayed and India looks the way India does. You know, it's a feat of imagination, diplomacy, courage, everything you can speak of.
No, but I would agree with what you first said about machinators, because, you know, Jinnah's two-nation theory was in simple forms that Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations and cannot live together. By that measure, Muslim majority states, rightfully, he could have asked them to join Pakistan. But he also asked Hindu majority states like Jodhpur, like Bikaner, like Rampur, to join Pakistan, which is totally contrary to his two-nation theory. So it wasn't just about getting what is rightfully theirs. It was going beyond, because, you know, he didn't expect to get only half of Punjab and half of Bengal, because they were partitioned, and he had to sort of make up for that. But like you said, the Jodhpur story, the Bikaner story, very, very interesting and really not spoken about for some reason. Bikaner, the previous Maharaja of Bikaner was Maharaja Ganga Singh, who actually had spent years trying to get the British to help him build a canal from Punjab, that is British province of Punjab, to the Bikaner, the state of Bikaner, which was again not the city today, but a large kingdom, because it was a desert kingdom. And he had built a canal over 20 years of, you know, giving money to British war efforts and doing various things to please the British, and finally managed to get what is called the Gang Canal from the Sutlej headworks, which were located in Punjab. Now, when partition was to take place, there was no saying where this headworks of this canal was to be located in the district of Firozpur. And Firozpur had a marginal Muslim majority. So the fear was that Firozpur would be given to Pakistan by Radcliffe, who was drawing the line dividing India and Pakistan. And if Firozpur went to Pakistan and Bikaner's source of water went to Pakistan, what would happen to Bikaner if they cut off the water? And that was a very real, palpable fear. I mean, it's easy to judge them and say, you know, they were traitors and so on, but any of us, put yourself in his shoes and what would you do? So Ganga Singh's son, Sadul Singh, was on the throne at this time, and there was a real fear, and they actually go to Mountbatten and say that, you know, if Firozpur is given to Pakistan, Bikaner will have no choice but to accede to Pakistan. Now, this was also a sort of bluff game, because they were trying to pressurize Mountbatten. Bikaner had a large Hindu majority, and I would not have probably, you know, would have risen up against that decision. But there is a very interesting story that Radcliffe's secretary, who's Christopher Beaumont, who actually says that Mountbatten falling into, because Nehru is the one who alerts Mountbatten about this. Mountbatten then summons Radcliffe and, you know, has a conversation. There is no record of this except by Christopher Beaumont, who's Radcliffe's secretary. And he says Mountbatten called Radcliffe for a lunch meeting and put pressure on him to give Firozpur to India. Now, Jinnah and Pakistan, of course, were, they claim that as well. But that we really have no idea. And ultimately, Firozpur went to India despite having a slight Muslim majority, and Bikaner stayed with India. Likewise, Jodhpur, you know, it's a border principality and could have gone to India or Pakistan, had a long drought there. The young Maharaja, his father had just passed away. He was only 24 years old. You know, if you're in your 20s and you're in charge of this and you have to take this big decision, it's not easy. And he was taken to meet Jinnah by the Nawab of Bhopal, who was actually one of the principal parties who was trying to get states to not join India. And Jinnah told him, you know, I understand that you have a drought. I'm ready to give you whatever you want. You can take control of Karachi port. You can take control of Sindh. You can take whatever you want. I'll give you the power, the authority to carry arms. You can have your own army. All these conditions, India was, of course, not giving them. Sardar Patel had I said, absolutely not. You know, states cannot have their own armies. But Jinnah was willing to pile on all the goodies. And the Maharaja of Jodhpur, that is Hanman Singh, was almost about to sign the accession papers when his ADC, Thakur Kesari Singh, tells him, why don't you go back and consult people before you take this decision? And he says, okay, I'll do that. And then he goes back, and then his mother and then a bunch of others convince him not to do that. And there's also a very dramatic scene where he goes to meet Menon, and Menon says, you know, you're a very young person. Jinnah is making you all these promises, but what is the guarantee that he's going to fulfill these promises? I can also promise you the moon, but be reasonable and, you know, don't get carried away by all this. And then he says, you sign the accession papers in India's favor. And when the Maharaja Hanman Singh actually takes out a pen. He's also a very interesting character who has a workshop in his palace where he builds a lot of things. And he pulls out his pen to sign this, and at the flip of a button, the pen becomes a revolver. And he holds it at Menon's head and says, "You better not betray me." And he's so tense because he's a young person. And so all this drama unfolds. Like a friend told me, if this turns into a Netflix series, that is the scene that, the dramatic scene that would begin the whole story. But yes, many, many interesting episodes like this.
In fact, I must salute you, and I know the Netflix CEO, Monica Shergill, does watch this sometime. Okay. I would suggest a Netflix serial out
fantastic.
of this.
That would be nice to see, yes.
But, we're going to run out of time, Mallika. This is a nice teaser for everyone to rush out and buy your book, because there are just so many fascinating stories. But I just wanted to stress on the fact that sometimes when you hear these stories, it does look like a very communal one, because Nawab Hamidullah of Bhopal was actively trying to stop the princes from joining India.
Yes.
There's, of course, the Nizam, there's the Kashmir story. But interestingly, there were so many Muslim leaders and mothers, and in fact, Nizam's own son, Prince Muazzam, who says the only way we'll have peace or our dynasty will be remembered with respect is if you join India, So the kaleidoscope keeps shifting.
Right.
So just give us one unusual story like that where it was a Muslim elder that made the prince join India.
So one such story is Rampur. Rampur had a Hindu majority population, but a Nawab, a Muslim Nawab on the throne. And it's in Uttar Pradesh. So it's in the middle of, it was not going to be a part of Pakistan at all. But Liaquat Ali Khan, who's, the first prime minister of Pakistan, just before 15th August, he goes to meet the Nawab of Rampur and his Diwan, who's Zaidi, his name is. And he tells him that, we are expecting to get a corridor from West Pakistan to East Pakistan. A whole land corridor of 700 miles is what Jinnah was expecting to get out of India. Imagine just a corridor of Pakistan running across India. And he said, then, Rampur will be connected to that. So you don't have to worry, you'll be connected to us through the corridor. And the Nawab, he said, unless you have a magic carpet and can fly Rampur into Pakistan's borders, I am not joining Pakistan. And the line the line which I liked, since you were talking about communal, he says, I am an Indian first and a Muslim only after that. So that is one of the shining examples of not all Muslims agreed with the Muslim League, idea of two-nation theory. Yeah.
We'll have to leave it at that, Mallika, but this is a potboiler story, and it's really a thrilling, untold story of, India's unification. And both VP Menon and Sardar Patel, Nehru's abhorrence of the feudal state, he calls it the hostile states. And the dynamics between all these leaders, it's a fascinating insight. And makes the whole story of India so much more precious, not to be taken for granted.
Absolutely.
It's a miracle that we are what we are.
Yes.
And you've really captured that.
Thank you
so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Shoma.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick short break, and then we have Amish Tripathi, which is a completely mesmerizing lens into ancient India, as I said, brought into the 21st century. So do join us very quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, that was lovely.
Thank you, Mallika.